In the region of Natlan, Hoya first decided to really look at the DPS roster we had currently and want to leg up almost all of the ones we had prior, giving us one of the most powerful roster of damage dealers we've had till this day. So in this video, I plan on going over every single Natlan DPS and ranking them from worst to best, while going over the strengths and flaws. Hello there, Flip here, and today a video, oh my god, wow. I am really sorry to the people that watch me for my YouTube videos. I've been busy torturing myself over on streams, trying to clear 100 viewer accounts. But don't worry, we only have 13 accounts left, so the normal upload schedule will be back on track. I've also been working on a really big Google document that contains the DPS of every single unit in Genshin, and that has been completed, so if you are curious about that, I'll leave a link in the description below. But to go back on topic, since we are at the tail end of Natlan, I do just want to evaluate how good I think all the Natlan DPS units are next to each other, showing calculations for the best teams. And I'm going to be looking at the Natlan roster from a Caesar standpoint, and throw in my little 2 cents on how they fare at dolphin levels of investment. But before we do that, as always, if at any points during the video you're entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing, as I talk on various topics regarding Genshin's meta and I'll try to keep you updated. And also, so right now Chaska and Mualani are currently on the banner, so if you'd like to cut down on the costs while going for them, then I would like to announce the sponsor for today's video, LD Shop. LD Shop is a very safe and reliable top-up site that allows you to get Primo Gems at a great deal starting from 15% off, while keeping your data safe. As for transactions, you only need to type in your UID and region, as you can see me doing here. Just needed to quickly refresh my welkin, and as you can see, it's here. And make sure to use my link, as that way you'll receive an extra 15% off coupon, as well as a 5% off coupon which can save you up to $50. LD Shop goes through official channels as well, meaning that you won't lose any of the in-game benefits like first time top-up bonuses, so no need to worry. And additionally, because LD Shop is so great, users who spend over $80 will receive a VIP membership, which rewards you with free welcome moons. So head over to ldshop.gg using my link in the description below. What are you waiting for? Thanks to LD Shop for sponsoring this video, now back to it. Now I'm not really going to give a deep dive on him, but I kinda just remembered that Ifa exists and is an Natlan DPS, and he's actually pretty solid now with the release of a Nefa, and I should just mention him. Of course, Ifa is the worst of the Natlan DPS roster, being a 4-star, but if you do have a Nefa, and especially with all the electric charge chilling going on, he can feel like a pretty comfortable character to use, with very solid team DPS sitting close to the 80k range. So yeah, for our baseline, Ifa's a pretty solid character. But now, starting at who I think the worst Natlan DPS of Caesar is, even though she is by all means an amazing character, I think that title goes to Chaska. And I would normally be scared of her fans, but I'm afraid their bullets won't melt, so I'll be fine. But to cover Chaska's kit, she's an Onimo character that uses her teammates' elements to deal damage from different elemental types, in which a large portion of her damage is dealt through her elemental skill, where she hovers in the air and rains down volleys of bullets to any enemies in her line of fire. Unlike other bow, charge attack DPS like Ganyu or Linny, where you have to aim, Chaska kinda just locks onto enemies, and because she's so high off the ground, she also very rarely gets hit, and she does have decent base interruption resistance in her skill state, in which I think the biggest positive of her is just the fact that she doesn't really take any brain to play to get her maximum results, which I can't really say for some of the other characters on this list. Chaska's just extremely comfortable and low maintenance to pilot. The next big positive of hers is that her single target output is among some of the highest in the game, especially in dual DPS ups with Mavuika, making her a great pickup for boss checks, which is very evident in the second half of this Abyss, where she's one of the best pickups, and she's also great in Stygian against the Papilla and the Cactus. Speaking of which, she's a very hard character to counter, just because with the way her kit works, she can essentially be played in damn near any team archetype involving the PHEC elements. Her Melt and Vape teams are her best, but if you ever need to run Freeze teams, if you have the supports for it, she can run those comfortably. If you need Pyro and Electro for shield breaking, she can also be placed in Pseudo Chef teams as well, and you can mix and match a lot of her teammates to make her favorable in most forms of content. But to now get into her negatives, I think the biggest one will just be her bullet RNG. To explain, Chaska has 6 shells for every volley of bullets she fires. At C0, 2 of these will always be Onimo no matter what you do, and the first 3 will correspond to the PHE element in your party, and then you have a chance to create a 4th bullet depending on how many different PHEC elements are on your team. The reason that this becomes an issue is, for one, if you aren't playing a team with 3 different elements, there's a chance you get an Onimo bullet for the 4th slot, which is actually just a fucking brick because it does so much less damage than an infused bullet. Then not only that, but her bullets have a special ICT to them, to where every other bullet applies an element. So at C0, that will be the 1st and 3rd, and then the 5th will always swirl. And why this is a problem is that, for example, in Vapor Melt teams, which are Chaska's best, there's a chance you can just like barely get any amplifying reaction procs. Or if you are using someone like Yanton, who's theoretically the best in a Melt team, this means you can get super fucked over by getting an electro reaction with every bullet, and just not get an amplifying reaction at all in your rotation, making Chaska's damage swing potentially much higher or lower than what's reflected in calculations, which normally just average out the scenarios. So Chaska's biggest flaw to me is her inconsistency, and then second, she also just struggles in any situation where there's more than one target. Chaska fires 6 bullets per volley, and this doesn't change no matter how many enemies are on screen, meaning that instead of her damage being multiplied when there are multiple enemies, which is what happens with most other DPS, her damage is instead divided and distributed, making her deal essentially the same amount of damage she would do in AoE in single target. If you look at someone like Varessa, if she did 100 damage to one enemy, she would do 200 to 2 enemies, where if Chaska was to deal 100 damage to one enemy, if there were 2 enemies, she would still do 100, it would just be divided between the both of them. Because of how ICDs are separate per enemy and the fact that swirls deal AoE damage, this isn't technically how it would work, but the idea is still mostly the same, that compared to other characters, Chaska does take a heavy hit to her AoE performance. And normally I wouldn't highlight a character being single target oriented as a massive downside, considering the hardest content in the game right now is Stygian, which doesn't care that much about AoE, and Chaska's among one of the best single target DPS anyways. It's just that the other characters on this list deal more single target damage or are basically equal, while not having this penalty at all. And another thing is the fact that compared to the other Natlan DPS, Chaska drops off the most theoretically from not having a Mavuika nuke in her teams, which you can decide whether or not is a big negative to you. By the way, that's why I have the two calculations, it's to show the best Mavuika and Mavuika teams for these characters. And for all of those reasons, I do think I would rank Chaska as the lowest, even in spite of the fact that I do think she's the most comfortable to play out of all the Natlan DPS. And I do think her flexibility is really funny. I was able to just run Bennett with 2 random Hydro and Cryo characters that don't on-field, and I was still able to clear the Abyss comfortably, which goes to show how much potential Chaska has for later supports. But that's future impacting, which doesn't matter. Let's move on to talk about the next character. Now, I'm not really sure how hot of a take this is, but I'm going to be placing Kinich here, just above Chaska. Going by his damage numbers, assuming you have at least one of his premium supports like Emily, Mavuika, or a high constellation Eonson, Kinich very comfortably lands himself within the 90 to 100k DPS range, and falls down to the 70 to 80k range with more free-to-play options. Although there is kind of a lot of jank with his team building. For one, his best general team in my opinion is with Mavuika, Eonson, and Emily. But then you're using Eonson as your only sustain, which, yeah. So if you're struggling with survivability, then you can put in a sustain like Dea or Toma. Then for his boss killing team, which runs both Bennett, Eonson, and then Emily, this team only really works in single wave content, as you can't refresh Pyro and multi-wave in this team. And then in situations where you want to drop Emily, you can't really guarantee Dendro Scroll even if you use someone like Eonson, making his team suffer the more rotations you have to do. So even though this doesn't really affect his damage output that much, there's always this weird layer of jank to his teams. I haven't even talked about the fact that to get very good mileage out of Kinich, you have to learn his 5 skill combos. Without these, he loses a pretty big portion of his damage, so it's worth learning if you want to main Kinich. To briefly explain, once Kinich enters his skill state, the biggest portion of his damage comes from his cannon shots, which are only really gated by how many Nightfall points you can generate for him. Without any cancels or anything, Kinich will generally only get 4 shots with standard play, but if you're able to do some of his cancels or tech, you can push out an extra cannon shot from him. And if you're really good, you can also do 6 cannon shots, but I don't think that's really practical. Some people do find doing 5 skills on Kinich hard either due to skill issues or ping related issues, which can make Kinich feel underwhelming for missing out a nuke. But I do think it's pretty realistic to assume, and with good practice, even I was able to get it down pretty consistently. If you want a general pointer to perform this more consistently, I found the wait tactic to be the most consistent, in which you do 2 normal attacks for your first cannon shot, and then afterwards you only do 1 normal attack and wait for his Ascension 1 to kick in for the rest of your points. That has given me the best results, and you can also use your burst to wait for his A4 to fill in so you can get a 5th shot easier too. Now to go into the pros and cons, Kinich is not really that Mavuika dependent, as unlike the other characters on this list, Mavuika doesn't really get a large access to buffs on Kinich teams, so she isn't doing a ton of personal damage, so much so to where you ultimately run Mavuika on Deepwood so she can make your Emily and Kinich do even more damage. PMC, the pyro sustains like Dea or Toma, or just not running an off-field pyro, are all able to sidegrade Mavuika quite nicely, and you aren't really losing a lot. Kinich also surprisingly has a lot of variety in his team building, which gives him a lot of high quality teams. As I said before, you only just need one of his premium supports, and then you have tons of ways to branch out into various 90k DPS teams. Auroran's a really good teammate for him, some underutilized pyro characters are good for him, you can run Sangling for inner teams too, they all perform quite decently. Just keep in mind that if you're using a team that removes burning aura even a little bit, that can ruin the consistency of getting 5 cannon shots. For Kinich Quans, I just think that he is a little janky, but to be fair, to me it could just be skill issue. When playing him against mobile enemies especially, his cannon shots will just like miss, or in teams where you're using Bennett he can sometimes have issues staying in a circle. And in multi-wave he feels really weird to control, but that could just be me not being fully used to him as I've played him the least out of every Natlan DPS. And the reason why I have him higher than Chaska is due to the fact that he's less reliant on Mavuika, and they have very similar single target performance while Kinich doesn't run into the same AoE issues as Chaska, with his cannon shots being able to hit multiple opponents, as well as the damage from his burst. And if you have Emily, her burst is also amazing for AoE too. Chaska also takes more valuable supports like Setlalia and Farina, where Kinich can get by with much less valued teammates. Now before moving into the next character I have on this list, I just want to say thank you for getting this far into the video. I really appreciate it. And if you're enjoying the video so far, the like and subscribe button are right under the video. So if you like what you've seen so far, I'd really appreciate if you pressed them. Not only that, but I do post my calculations at Twitter much earlier than my videos. So if you want to see them early, make sure to go follow me over there. And also share my videos and calculations, it'd really help out a ton. Back on topic now, where we will talk about everyone's favorite shark girl, or well, second favorite LNJ better, Mualani. Now, despite the fact that Mualani doesn't cheat the best, as you can see from my calculations compared to the other Natlan DPS, let me explain why I have her up so high. But before we do that, let's briefly touch up on her kit. Mualani, like most damage dealers, will enter special stance with her skill. This makes Mualani surf on her shark, in which by running into enemies, she will level up her normal attack, which is a very strong multiplier. And because you attack so slowly, it allows Mualani to enable 4 vaporize hits, more than doubling her raw damage. She does 3 of these bites of rotation in single target, and her burst is just another nuke she can easily vape. So the reason why I have Mualani up so high is just because even if she cheats lower, her performance on paper isn't necessarily reflective of how good she ends up being in practice, due to her reaching high damage breakpoints quickly with how much damage her nukes are able to do, making her end chambers very early into rotations. Some of my more impressive abyss clears have been from just Mualani nuking things with one shark bite or elemental burst, and slaughtering like half an enemy's HP bar. And this isn't something most of the other Natlan DPSs can do, barring like Mavuika. And unlike Kinich and Chaska, for AoE content, Mualani has like actual AoE, she's able to mark up to 5 enemies, all of which will take a good portion of her nuke damage, while giving her very consistent results for AoE clears too, even without grouping. For cons, I do think Mualani can be a bit janky. It has gotten better since her release as they adjusted her targeting, but after playing her a lot for Stygian clears, I've noticed that her pyre applicators like PMC can literally just fucking suck, or more annoyingly, Mualani's burst is just 50-50s whether it wants a hit or not, which is extremely frustrating. On top of that, a lot of Mualani teams rely on purely Shallonen to sustain, and something I noticed against the turtle is that you have to extend rotations for survivability on Mualani, which did cost me a lot of clears. I swear to god, when playing this character, you'll encounter things you would have never thought would be possible. TLDR, she can feel like shit to play sometimes, but if you can get over her occasional jank, I think she cements herself comfortably as a top 3 Natlan DPS. Now we can move on to talking about my GOAT, Veressa. This character is my favorite DPS to use right now. She just feels extremely fluid to play. And I'm so happy she's as strong as she is, comfortably cheating as a top 3 character behind Mavuika and Skirk. And even still cracking over 100k DPS on a full 4-star team, just make sure to have C6, Eonson, and Chevreuse lying around. Veressa's playstyle at C0 ultimately comes down to just chaining her skill, charge, plunge combos, and her raw damage is just very fucking good. And with amps from Chevreuse and her essentially dedicated support Eonson, she's able to shit out really high damage numbers with a wide radius, making her both an amazing single target and AoE carry for all types of content, not really struggling anywhere. Even outside of her Chevreuse team, she's also able to comfortably slot into EC type of teams, whether that's with Ifa or more hyper carry oriented plunge teams with Jillian or Shanyin, although Overload teams will still generally be her best. For actual like issues with Veressa, I really think she's one of the most complete damage dealers we've had, and the only real issue I have with her is the fact that her targeting can be really annoying at times when it just locks onto the wrong enemy, but her plunge radius is big enough to where it doesn't become a massive issue. Her skill cooldown can also be a problem the longer your rotations go on, causing you to have to use a charge attack to plunge again, but again, it really isn't that much of a con. And lastly, for what I think the biggest issue Veressa has right now, it's just getting all of her pieces together. Most of Veressa's power is locked behind 4-star constellations, with 4 stars notoriously being one of the hardest things to get in Genshin. It took me over a year to get a C6 Chevreuse, and with Eonton, it took me getting Veressa C1, as well as pulling on the Mavuika band to finalize her C6. Then the biggest blow after this is just the fact that her vertical investment, like getting her cons and weapons, although they are really big increases, the other Natlan characters, since they use more 5-stars in their teams, are able to usually scale harder than Veressa does. Like Chaska, Mualani, and Mavuika get a C2 set Lolly, which is one of the most overpowered constellations in the game, which is something Veressa can't really compete with when looking at low to mid vertical investment. But that doesn't affect her C0 rankings much, which is why I'm actually evaluating. But that's all I have to say about Veressa. She's an amazing character all around. Let's close out the video. To literally no one's surprise, the best Natlan DPS, and in my opinion the overall best DPS in the game, is of course Mavuika. I already made a video on her recently, so I'm not going to go into too much depth covering her kit. Just know she has a special state where all her attacks just do a fuck ton of damage, and with her ICD she's able to capitalize on melt teams very well, on top of the fact that her burst is able to hit like a truck with pretty minimal setup, assuming you use the right buffs. Mavuika's best teams are her melt teams right now, but she still has very strong vape or overload setups that are still better than what most other carries can run. For pros, Mavuika is the current damage ceiling of the game with amazing AoE from her charge attacks, making her the best boss killer as well as one of the best for handling hordes of enemies. I wish I could say more about her character or performance or upsides, but she really just does a lot more damage than the rest of the cast. That is kind of just why she's better. All of Genshin's endgame modes want you to clear fast, so a character like Mavuika that just does so much more damage than the rest of the cast is of course going to be the most favorite DPS. And it's nice that she does this with nice quality of life like her range, and the fact that she gets infinite interruption resistance in her burst form. I've been doing multiple account clears over these past 2 weeks, and even when people have a more built DPS, Mavuika's damage baseline is so high to where it doesn't really matter, and because of the fact that so much of her damage is packed into her initial nuke, she has the same benefits as Mualani to where she can just end up ending chambers super early into rotations, making her feel a lot better than characters with more spread out damage. In terms of negatives, the only one I can really think of is because of the fact that so much of her damage is in her initial nuke, it can lead to situations where for lower HP enemies, she can overkill mobs by so much, to a degree of damage you just didn't need. For example, looking at the top half for this floor 12, yeah, Mavuika will be able to just one-shot this first wave of enemies, but you have done exponentially more damage than what is required, and because Mavuika's damage distribution is lower for her charge attacks or whatever combo you decide to do, it can make her lose in multi-whip to characters like Varessa, for example, who has a mix of front-loaded and sustained damage in her kit. You can alleviate this by not playing a melt or vape team and using a Chev team instead, but just something to keep note of. As you can see in the background footage, I'm comparing a Mavuika melt team to a Mavuika Chevreuse team and a Varessa team, in which even though Varessa obviously does less damage, Mavuika's damage profile just doesn't translate the best to this type of content compared to some other characters. You can also talk about Mavuika's dependence on needing Natlan units in her teams to battery her, but at this point we have so many Natlan supports and they're the best supports in the game currently regardless, to where I don't think it's really that massive of a downside. But yeah, despite those minor downsides, I don't really think there's much more to say regarding Mavuika. She's so strong she kinda just overshadows the Natlan roster. Not only that, but as you can see, she also ironically enough does make the best team for a lot of the Natlan DPS anyways. Varessa, Mualani, and Chaska with C0 investment do really like having Mavuika a lot in their teams, either because she adds in a lot of damage or for a very convenient pyre application. Durin, save us! So here's my list on ranking the Natlan DPS from worst to best at C0. Take your screenshot and inform Karma on me for Reddit or Twitter likes, I don't care. Now to quickly go over C2R1 rankings, as I do think things change a bit for some characters. Mavuika of course stays the best, but from second onwards I do think things change a bit. For starters, I think Chaska just gained an immense amount of value from her C1 R1 and C2. Her C1 opening up team options and making melt and overvape better as you have an increased chance to trigger a reaction, her weapon being a great stat stick, and her C2 actually like giving her AoE front load. And although her jump from third to second isn't as impressive, to talk about Mulan, who gains a very impressive nuke from her C1 and then her C2 gives her an additional shark bite, whilst making her more consistent than she is at C0 for nice quality of life. And then I have Varessa and Kinich in the last 2 slots just because even though their vertical investment is obviously good, the other DPS like Mavuika, Chaska, and Mualani benefiting from amplifying reactions massively spikes up their abilities to just nuke chambers, or do setups that much more comfortably clear content faster. And then from a teammate standpoint, besides getting Mavuika cons, Varessa can't really scale upwards that well, as her other teammates are 4 stars, while Mavuika, Chaska, and Mualani get a powerhouse like C2 Setlali at dolphin levels of investment. But alas, that's all I have to say. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment where you rank the Natlan DPS, as I'd love to hear it and respond to almost every single comment. Shout out to all my lovely channel members, your support means the world to me. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.